Have you ever wondered what it really felt like to be the first human ancestor who looked at the world and sensed something beyond survival? Something that could not be touched or hunted or eaten? This is the moment where the roots of faith began, long before temples, long before names for gods, long before anything we recognize as religion. Picture a landscape 4.8 million years ago, where our early ancestors lived among predators, storms, hunger, and an overwhelming sense of mystery. In that world, every shadow carried meaning, every sound in the night could be a threat or a message, and every spark of fire seemed to hold a secret. Spirituality was not an idea yet. It was a feeling, a raw intuition that there was something greater shaping the rhythm of existence. Imagine one of these early beings staring at a lightning strike. The explosion of light in the sky was not just weather. It was a force, a sign, a presence. Their minds, still forming the foundation of human awareness, began linking cause and effect, danger and protection, fear and meaning. This is where the first seeds of belief started to form, not as doctrines, but as survival instincts wrapped in awe. The early hominid who paused to observe the wind moving through the tall grass was experiencing the earliest version of spiritual curiosity. Something invisible was moving the world, and that feeling sparked questions long before language existed. It was the first quiet moment of awareness, that life was guided by more than muscle and instinct. Across generations, this instinct became a pattern. Every sunrise became a reminder that the world followed rules they could sense, but not control. Every night sky, filled with countless stars, pulled their attention upward and forced them to confront vastness. Slowly, a new capacity emerged. Wonder. And wonder, in a dangerous and unpredictable world, was not weakness. It was the earliest tool of meaning, guiding behavior, shaping group unity, and influencing the decisions that would ultimately shape humanity itself. The first spark of faith was not a ritual. It was a perception, a deep feeling carved by fear, curiosity, and the need to understand why life moved the way it did. And as this feeling grew, it quietly began guiding the choices that made our ancestors something more than animals. You have probably felt something like this yourself, a moment where logic stops and a deeper sense rises inside you. If that resonates with you, tell me in the comments what experiences awakened that feeling. And make sure you like this video and check if you are subscribed, because understanding this journey changes the way we see ourselves. What comes next reveals how those early sensations evolved into the first symbolic actions that shaped humanity, and the story is only becoming more intriguing from here. As those primitive sensations of awe and uncertainty continued to shape early minds, something extraordinary began to unfold in the daily lives of our ancestors. Little by little, the world stopped being a simple stage for survival and began transforming into a landscape of meaning. This shift happened not through spoken explanations, because language was still far away, but through gestures. A stone placed intentionally near another stone, a bone arranged differently from the rest, or a stick carried not for utility, but for a feeling it seemed to hold. These early acts were small, almost invisible to modern eyes, yet they marked a monumental turning point. For the first time, an object was not valued for its practical use, but for the invisible weight it carried in the mind. Imagine an ancestor picking up a smooth pebble. It caught the light in a certain way, felt warm or cool against the skin, and triggered a spark of recognition. That pebble became different from the others, scattered across the ground. It held a presence. It became a symbol, even if the meaning was not yet fully formed. What made it special was not the object itself, but the intention behind selecting it. This moment represents the earliest signs of symbolic thinking, the foundation of every belief system that would come later. These gestures were not random. They were rooted in an evolving awareness that connected emotions to objects. Over thousands of years, such small symbolic acts would shape group behavior. A feather kept by one individual might later be placed beside another feather collected by someone else, forming a tiny pattern recognized only by them. Patterns became memory, memory became identity. As these gestures repeated across generations, they started influencing decisions, shaping alliances, and creating bonds based on shared recognition of what was meaningful. Symbolic objects became anchors of understanding in a world that was still brutal and unpredictable. They carried comfort, fear, curiosity, or protection, each emotion silently tied to the object itself. This transformation changed not only how early humans interacted with the environment, but also how they perceived one another. Someone who gathered certain objects or arranged them with intention began to be seen differently, perhaps with respect or intrigue. These individuals were the first carriers of symbolic insight, the early seeds of what would eventually become leaders, storytellers, or spiritual figures. Without language, without ritual, without doctrine, humanity began shaping its first silent vocabulary. Objects became messages. And through these messages, the world gradually shifted into something that could be explained not only through survival, but through meaning. As symbolic gestures grew stronger among early hominids, another profound transformation began taking shape around one of the most intense experiences a group could face: death. Long before spoken prayers or carved monuments, the loss of a member of the group created a moment unlike any other. When a body stopped moving, when warmth faded from the skin, when familiar eyes no longer responded, something inside those early humans shifted. They sensed that the body before them was not simply an empty form. It carried weight, significance, and a lingering presence they could not explain. This was the moment where the idea of the sacred first emerged, not through ceremony, but through instinct. Imagine the quiet that fell over the group. Those who had shared food, shelter, fear, and sheltering nights with the fallen individual felt something that went beyond confusion. They felt a rupture in the rhythm of existence. The body in front of them was still recognizable, yet profoundly different from the living companion they had known moments earlier. This contrast triggered a new kind of awareness, the recognition that life had layers, some visible and some hidden. The early mind began to grasp that something had departed, even if the word for it had not been invented. This sense of absence created the first spark of reverence. Over time, this reverence shaped behavior. Instead of leaving the body exposed, early humans began to place it with care, arranging stones around it or covering it lightly with soil and objects deemed significant. These actions were not yet rituals in the structured sense, but they represented the first attempts to honor something beyond physical survival. The body became an anchor for questions they could not articulate. Where did the warmth go? What happened to the awareness that once lived in those eyes? Was there a force guiding the transition between presence and absence? Every burial was a quiet attempt to answer these questions, with gestures rather than words. This practice soon influenced the emotional landscape of the group. The act of gathering around the dead created unity, reinforcing bonds through shared grief and curiosity. It encouraged cooperation, compassion, and a deeper sense of belonging. And as these patterns repeated across countless generations, they planted the seeds for what would eventually become spiritual systems, stories of origins, and beliefs about the unseen. The moment our ancestors treated the body of one of their own as something sacred marked a turning point in human evolution. It showed that meaning did not end with life, and that understanding the unseen was becoming just as essential as surviving the visible world. As early humans continued to confront the mysteries of life and death, a new force began shaping their inner world, the overwhelming power of the natural elements. Long before myths had names, long before the idea of deities took form, the environment itself became the first great teacher of fear and meaning. Night arrived like a curtain that swallowed everything familiar. The darkness was complete, heavy, and alive with sounds that pierced through the quiet. For our ancestors, darkness was not simply the absence of light. It was a realm of uncertainty where predators, spirits, or invisible forces could be waiting. This fear, raw and primal, was a guide that pushed the early mind to search for patterns and explanations. The arrival of fire changed that experience forever. Fire was not just warmth. It was a boundary between safety and danger, chaos and control. Imagine a group huddled around a flickering flame, watching the shadows dance on the cave walls. The fire crackled, breathed, and consumed. It felt alive, almost conscious, responding to the wind, growing stronger or weaker with the offerings of wood. This was the moment when the natural world began to feel like a collection of personalities, each with its own temperament. Thunder roared like an angered force, storms swept across the land with violent intention, and the wind whispered through the trees as if carrying messages. None of these sensations were random to the early human mind. They were signs, warnings, or expressions of something powerful that existed beyond physical sight. Over time, these forces shaped the emotional fabric of early communities. When a storm approached, the group moved together, responding with coordinated fear and respect. When lightning struck a tree, the explosion of light and sound became a moment of awe that left a lasting imprint on memory. These events were stored not just as experiences, but as explanations. The world was communicating, and they were learning to interpret its language. With each encounter, the mind grew sharper, more capable of connecting inner emotion with outer phenomena. Fear was not only a survival instinct, it became a doorway to meaning. This connection between emotion and environment laid the foundation for beliefs that would stretch far beyond those early landscapes. The fire was a guardian, the storm was a force of judgment, the darkness was a realm of spirits. These interpretations were not yet stories, but they formed the mental architecture from which all future mythology would grow. And as these ideas strengthened, early humans developed a deeper sense of belonging to a world that was both nurturing and unpredictable. These primal feelings would soon evolve into shared narratives that shaped identity, behavior, and cooperation. If you have ever felt the power of nature speaking to you in a way you cannot quite explain, share your experience in the comments. Your perspective might reveal something others have felt but never expressed, and it deepens our understanding of how these ancient emotions still live within us today. As the natural forces shaped the emotional awareness of early humans, something even more transformative began to rise from within the groups themselves. Movements, gestures, and repeated actions slowly took on a deeper meaning, turning survival behaviors into the earliest forms of ritual. These rituals did not begin as ceremony or tradition. They emerged from necessity, from instinct, from the need to create unity in a world that was hostile and unpredictable. When early humans gathered to hunt, migrate, protect themselves from storms, or care for the young, their actions began to develop patterns. Over time, these patterns gained significance, becoming moments where the group acted with a shared focus rather than individual instinct. Imagine a group preparing to face the darkness of night. Each person added wood to the fire, one after another, not because someone told them to, but because repetition brought comfort. The fire became stronger, and in that process, the group became stronger too. These repeated actions created a rhythm, a sense of order in a landscape filled with chaos. Over generations, this rhythm evolved into a kind of unspoken ritual. Certain places became preferred for gathering, certain objects were touched or held before a difficult task, and certain movements were repeated before setting out on a dangerous journey. These gestures offered reassurance, shaping the emotional state of the community and reinforcing the belief that unity provided protection against the unknown. As symbolic thinking grew, these rituals became more refined. A gesture once meant for comfort began to carry deeper layers of meaning. A hand placed on another's shoulder could signify support, gratitude, or shared fear. A stone placed in a circle could represent memory or continuity. Patterns of movement, especially during moments of uncertainty, became a way for early humans to bind themselves to each other and to something beyond themselves. These rituals shaped identity, creating distinctions between groups and reinforcing bonds. They also strengthened cooperation, which was essential for survival. A group that moved together with intention stood a greater chance of finding food, shelter, and safety. The emotional effect of these rituals was profound. Performing them reduced fear, increased focus, and synchronized the minds of those who participated. Over time, these coordinated gestures created a shared sense of meaning, even without a formal belief system. A ritual could transform a simple action into a moment of significance, reminding individuals that they were part of something larger. This emerging sense of belonging helped humans navigate grief, conflict, and uncertainty. It also encouraged the idea that unseen forces might respond to or be influenced by human behavior. As these behaviors spread across generations, they set the stage for the next great leap in human spirituality. Rituals were no longer only about safety or coordination. They became a language of their own, capable of expressing emotions, memories, and hopes that could not yet be spoken. And through them, humanity began building the emotional foundation of belief, preparing the mind for the first stories that would soon give shape to the unseen world. As rituals continued to weave meaning into the daily lives of early humans, something remarkable began to rise from the silence of the night. When the fire dimmed and the group settled into rest, the world around them transformed into a theater of sounds. Cracking branches, distant calls, shifting winds, and the steady rhythm of breathing bodies created an atmosphere where imagination awakened. In this fragile space between wakefulness and sleep, the earliest forms of narrative were born. These were not stories as we know them, but sensations shaped into meaning, impressions that merged memory with emotion. Without words, early humans began passing on experiences through gestures, sounds, and repeated actions that imitated the world around them. Picture a child in a prehistoric group listening to an elder mimic the growl of a predator encountered earlier that day. The sound, low and controlled, carried not only the memory of danger, but also guidance, how to react, what to fear, what to notice. This was the seed of narrative. It allowed knowledge to survive beyond a single lifetime. A gesture representing a successful hunt became a symbol of pride. A repeated sound representing the wind inside a cave became a signal of safety or danger. These shared impressions formed the first building blocks of myth, long before myths had structure. Through these imitations, early humans gave shape to invisible forces that influenced their world. Over time, these nocturnal expressions evolved into something more complex. When the group gathered around the fire, certain individuals naturally captured attention. Their movements were more expressive, their imitations more vivid. These early performers were not yet storytellers in the formal sense, but they held a unique role within the group. They translated experience into meaning. Their gestures turned a frightening storm into a memory that could be carried and understood. Their imitations of animals or natural forces became a way to teach survival strategies. Every gesture that repeated across generations grew into a shared narrative, shaping the emotional identity of the community. As symbolic capacity expanded, early CE, humans started linking these gestural narratives with the rituals they performed. A sound repeated before a hunt carried the memory of past success. A pattern drawn in the dirt echoed the movement of predators. These expressions did more than share information. They organized reality. They offered explanations for events that had no clear cause. A strange noise at night became the voice of a spirit. A powerful storm became a sign of something watching over or challenging the group. These interpretations strengthened unity and helped individuals cope with fear, uncertainty, and loss. In this evolving landscape, the boundary between the visible and the invisible grew thinner. The world was no longer just a space to survive. It became a world filled with meaning carried through sounds, gestures, and shared impressions. These early narratives marked the moment when humanity began shaping reality through imagination, preparing the path for beliefs that would soon take form in specific places, objects, and rituals that connected the living to forces they could not see. As early humans shaped meaning through sounds, gestures, and shared impressions, another profound shift began to unfold in the landscape around them. Certain places started to feel different from the rest. A cave, where echoes carried unusual tones. A tree struck repeatedly by lightning. A cliff where the wind produced haunting vibrations. Or a spring where mist rose in swirling patterns. These were not random features to the early mind. They were thresholds, points where the visible world seemed to touch something deeper. Over generations, these locations gathered emotional weight. Individuals returned to them not only for shelter or resources, but because the place itself felt charged with significance. Imagine a clearing where sunlight pierced through the trees in narrow beams, illuminating dust particles that floated like tiny sparks. To the early human, this was not just light. It was presence. Or imagine a cave where footprints remained preserved for seasons, as if the earth itself was holding memories. The sense that certain places carried the imprint of unseen forces shaped the very first concept of the sacred. These places were not chosen. They were discovered, recognized through instinct and emotional resonance. The group learned to approach them with caution, curiosity, and a subtle form of reverence. As symbolic thinking expanded, the behaviors around these places evolved. Stones were arranged at entrances, feathers left on ledges, bones placed in patterns that only held meaning to the group. These gestures were simple, yet they carried the weight of intention. Returning to the same location again and again reinforced the belief that the place itself offered protection, insight, or connection to something beyond human understanding. Each visit layered new emotions onto old memories, turning the landscape into a living archive of meaning. The place became not just a setting, but a participant in the spiritual life of the group. These early sacred sites also served as anchors for identity. A group that gathered around a particular rock formation or cave entrance began to associate their strength, survival, and unity with that location. It shaped their stories, guided their rituals, and influenced their migrations. Even without language, the emotional bond formed through repeated visits created a shared sense of belonging that extended beyond the individuals themselves. The landscape became a silent companion, a witness to their fears, triumphs, and transitions. Over time, these places evolved into markers of continuity, connecting generations through shared spiritual memory. As the mind of early humanity grew more complex, these sacred spaces shaped the very structure of belief. They were the first altars, the first temples, the first symbols of connection between the physical world and the invisible one. Standing in these places, early humans felt part of something larger, something that shaped their choices, their rituals, and their emerging sense of the divine. And these locations would soon influence how different species of early humans experienced faith and meaning across the long arc of evolution. If you have ever felt a powerful connection to a place without knowing exactly why, share your experience in the comments. Your insight might help reveal how these ancient instincts still echo within us today. As sacred places began shaping the emotional world of early humans, evolution itself pushed their inner experiences into new territories. Each shift in species brought not only physical changes, but subtle transformations in perception, awareness, and emotional depth. The emergence of new brain structures expanded cognitive abilities, allowing early humans to interpret the world with increasing nuance. The minds of Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and eventually Homo sapiens did not experience the environment in the same way. Each evolutionary leap added layers to the way they understood fear, awe, connection, and the invisible forces that seem to flow through the landscape. Picture an early ancestor with a smaller, simpler brain encountering a mysterious location. The sensation might have been raw and instinctual, a feeling of alertness or caution. But as generations passed and the brain expanded, that instinct evolved into interpretation. A place that once felt dangerous began to feel meaningful. A sound that once triggered fear began to invite curiosity. The mind's growing ability to remember, imagine, and link past experiences with new sensations allowed early humans to craft mental models that stretched beyond immediate survival. These models formed the roots of belief systems, embedding emotional resonance into the world around them. With each evolutionary step, early humans also developed a greater capacity for cooperation. Shared beliefs became tools that unified the group, helping them coordinate in hunting, migration, shelter building, and defense. As brains grew more capable of abstract thought, individuals began to imagine forces that could not be seen, entities that might exist behind storms, within fire, or in the silence of sacred places. These invisible concepts strengthened social bonds because they offered explanations and comfort in moments when fear or uncertainty threatened the cohesion of the group. Belief became more than instinct. It became a social mechanism that shaped identity and guided behavior. The emergence of complex emotions further deepened this experience. Early humans began to feel curiosity blended with fear, comfort mixed with longing, grief softened by a sense of continuity. These emotional combinations created internal landscapes that had never existed before. Through them, the idea of the spiritual world grew richer and more layered. The dead were no longer just absent. They might be present in ways that could be sensed. The natural elements were no longer only threats or resources. They became voices, guardians, or reminders of unseen truths. Evolution gave humanity the cognitive tools to weave these ideas together into something coherent. As species continued to shift over hundreds of thousands of years, faith evolved with them. It adapted to new challenges, new climates, new forms of communication, and new social structures. What began as instinctual responses slowly transformed into organized patterns of thought that shaped how groups lived, traveled, and made meaning of their world. And as these capacities grew, humanity moved closer to a moment when spiritual understanding would expand beyond the individual and become a force capable of shaping entire communities across vast distances and long stretches of time. As human evolution continued to refine perception and emotional depth, something even more powerful began to define the destiny of early communities: the emergence of collective spirit. What started as individual sensations of awe, fear, or wonder slowly expanded until those feelings were shared across entire groups. Spirituality was no longer just an internal experience. It became a social force, shaping cooperation on a scale that no other species on Earth could match. Early humans did not just survive because they were strong or adaptable. They survived because they learned to believe together. Imagine a group gathered around a fire after a successful hunt. The flames illuminated their faces as they reenacted the dangers they had faced. Each gesture, each sound, reinforced a shared understanding of the world. These shared impressions shaped expectations, trust, and unity. Over time, they formed the emotional architecture that allowed groups to move with intention and confidence. Cooperation became more than a practical necessity. It became a reflection of the unseen forces they believed guided their steps. Shared spirituality offered something that pure instinct could not: a sense of belonging that transcended the individual. As cooperation grew, so did complexity. Larger groups brought new challenges. Conflicts had to be resolved, roles had to be defined, migration had to be coordinated. Beliefs became tools that helped regulate behavior, creating unwritten rules that anchored social order. The idea that certain actions pleased or displeased unseen forces encouraged individuals to act in ways that benefited the entire group. This gave rise to early forms of moral understanding. A person who broke a pattern or disrupted a ritual was not only challenging the group, but risking the relationship with the forces that protected them. In this way, spirituality became a powerful mechanism for maintaining cohesion. Beyond coordination, shared belief also strengthened emotional resilience. When the group faced loss, scarcity, or danger, the sense of a shared, invisible presence helped them endure. The idea that ancestors watched over them, or that the land itself carried meaning, transformed fear into purpose. Facing hardship together forged bonds that extended beyond bloodlines, shaping alliances built on trust and shared story rather than simple kinship. These bonds allowed early humans to travel farther, settle new regions, and adapt to unfamiliar environments with confidence rooted in collective meaning. As groups grew larger and more interconnected, their shared spiritual frameworks became more elaborate. Symbols were carried between families, gestures repeated across generations, and sacred places visited by different bands that crossed paths. This exchange of beliefs helped unify diverse groups, allowing them to coexist, collaborate, or merge in moments of necessity. The collective spirit became a force that traveled with them, shaping every decision, every ritual, and every new step into the unknown. Without realizing it, humanity was building the foundations for the complex, spiritual systems that would one day stretch across continents and define civilizations. As the collective spirit strengthened and traveled through generations, something subtle yet monumental began forming beneath every shared gesture, every symbolic act, every sacred place visited again and again. Humanity was building an invisible heritage, a foundation of belief that existed long before written language, carved idols, or structured rituals. These early forms of spirituality were not accidental. They were the result of countless emotional imprints passed from one mind to another, shaping how communities viewed life, death, danger, and destiny. What emerged from this long process was a quiet but powerful legacy that guided early humans even when they could not explain it. The beliefs they carried were woven into their instincts, influencing choices in ways they barely understood. Take the moment a group approached a clearing where their ancestors once gathered. Even if no markers remained, the place carried a familiarity deep in memory. These unspoken sensations shaped behavior, prompting individuals to move, pause, or gather in ways that felt natural. Over time, the echoes of past actions blended with new experiences, creating an emotional map that guided entire communities through landscapes filled with both threat and meaning. This invisible continuity connected people across generations, forming the earliest foundations of tradition. It did not matter that no stories were written or that no doctrines existed. The memory lived through repetition, emotion, and shared purpose. As humanity migrated, adapted to changing climates, and encountered new challenges, this inner map evolved with them. It provided structure when resources were scarce, comfort when loss struck, and unity when conflict emerged. Each symbolic gesture, each ritual of movement or silence, each return to a meaningful place deepened the belief that the world was woven with forces beyond the visible. These internal frameworks allowed early humans to face uncertainty with courage shaped not only by instinct, but by meaning. And as these beliefs took root, they slowly transformed into the foundations of the systems that would later define entire civilizations. The seeds planted millions of years ago would grow into myths, gods, philosophies, and questions about purpose that continue to guide us today. Faith did not appear suddenly. It accumulated through countless silent steps, through decisions made in firelight and shadows, through emotions carried by people who had no words for what they felt, yet sensed something powerful shaping their existence. When you look at how humanity evolved from these early roots, it becomes clear that this legacy still lives within us. The desire to understand the unseen, to feel part of something larger, to find meaning in places, objects, or moments that stir something deep inside. All of this echoes the earliest spiritual instincts of our ancestors. And exploring this lineage helps us understand not only where belief began, but why it continues to shape our choices and our vision of the world. If you reached this point, tell me in the comments. This message was for me, so I know you stayed with me until the end. And if this journey through our ancient past resonated with you, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next chapters we explore together. Your like also helps keep this exploration alive and growing. There is another video waiting for you right here that continues this line of thought, so go ahead and follow me there as we uncover the next layers of our human story.